So what if the founding of Christianity wasn't just, a spiritual awakening?
Right.
What if it was actually the direct result of a botched, high-stakes political assassination?
It's a pretty wild thought.
It really is. Today we're doing something a bit different for this deep dive. We are taking a sledgehammer to these stained glass windows, basically. Because usually when we look back at the origins of major world religions, the narrative is just painfully clean.
Oh, absolutely.
Like everyone is standing perfectly still, bathed in holy light, hands folded, acting entirely on this spiritual plane. Good versus evil,
Yep.
right versus wrong.
Yeah, and I mean, it is incredibly comforting to view history through that binary lens. We really prefer our historical figures to be neatly categorized, untouchable heroes or absolute villains.
Right, no gray area.
Exactly, no gray area. But when you strip away the theological filter and actually look at the raw mechanical reality of first century Judea, that clean narrative just shatters completely.
It totally falls apart.
It does. You aren't looking at some serene theater of divine intervention. You are looking at a cutthroat, deeply cynical political swamp.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive today. We are tearing into this massive stack of historical texts, political analyses, and geopolitical records that radically reinterpret the origin story of Saul of Tarsus.
The man who would eventually become the Apostle Paul.
Yes, exactly. We want to unpack how a lethal political betrayal, these really bitter regional blood feuds and underground intelligence networks, completely transformed Saul's identity.
Which is such a fascinating angle.
It really is. We are going to look at how a massive systemic assassination plot forced his entire worldview to shift, going from this rigid, violent legalism to a philosophy of radical grace.
But before we plunge into the mechanics of all this, we really should establish some ground rules for our analysis today.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because we're looking at these events strictly objectively. The material we're examining for this deep dive treats first-century Judea as a deeply complex web of economics, power, and survival.
We're talking politics and money.
Exactly. So we are not taking a religious or theological stance here at all. We aren't validating or invalidating modern faith for anyone listening.
Right.
We are simply putting on our investigative hats, We're just examining the evidence that frames these historical events as human actions, driven by very human and often desperate motivations.
Basically, we're looking at the political chessboard, not the heavens. But I do want to start with the people actually moving the pieces on that board.
The shot callers.
Right, because you don't get a geopolitical spy thriller without a massive entrenched organization pulling the strings. So to you listening, if we want to understand Saul, we have to understand the bosses he worked for.
Which is crucial.
Right. So how did the religious elite in Jerusalem actually function under the thumb of the Roman Empire? I mean, what was the dynamic there?
Well, to understand the local elite, you first have to understand the overarching superpower. So in the early first century, we're talking roughly around 30 to 33 AD, Emperor Tiberius is at the helm of Rome. And Rome is coming off decades of really aggressive expansion by his predecessor, Augustus. So Rome is this well-oiled machine enjoying immense prosperity.
But not like accidental prosperity.
No, not magic. It wasn't born out of thin air. It was a brutal, incredibly efficient mechanism. Rome fundamentally cared about three things, and three things only: power, manpower, and money.
The unholy trinity of empire building.
That's a great way to put it.
I mean, they didn't care about your local culture or your god. They cared if your checks cleared. Right?
That is literally it, because Rome herself didn't actually produce a massive surplus of exportable commercial goods.
Oh, really? I didn't realize that.
Yeah, what they exported was military dominance and a bureaucratic system designed specifically to extract wealth from conquered territories.
So they were basically a giant extraction machine.
Exactly. They exploited natural resources, they instituted heavy taxation, and of course they relied on slavery. The entire Roman engine ran on a continuous, massive influx of wealth from the provinces back to the capital.
They needed a stable, uninterrupted river of money.
A river of money. And Judea was one of those provinces.
But from everything I've read about Judea in this period, it was notoriously difficult to govern. Like, it wasn't some peaceful, compliant farming region that just handed over their taxes happily.
Oh, not at all. It was a completely restive, turbulent area that constantly pushed back against Roman occupation.
It was basically a nightmare for Roman administrators.
An absolute nightmare. And because of that constant friction, the Roman prefects guys like Pontius Pilate, They realized pretty quickly that they could not micromanage the daily lives of the Jewish population without sparking endless revolts.
They needed a buffer.
Exactly. They relied heavily on the local leadership to keep the peace. And this brings us to the Sanhedrin Council.
Okay, the Sanhedrin. Let's dig into them.
Right. So traditionally, the Sanhedrin was the supreme religious, judicial, and legislative body for the Jewish people. But if you look at the logistical reality of the era, you really have to view them through a completely different lens.
How so?
Well, the analytical texts we're using today refer to the Sanhedrin during this period, not just as a religious council, but as God Inc.
God Inc. I actually love that framing.
It changes things, sure.
It forces a hard reset on how you picture them. You immediately stop imagining a group of, humble priests praying quietly in a temple, and you start picturing a ruthless board of directors sitting in a corporate high-rise, just obsessing over quarterly profit margins.
That is the exact right image to have in your head. Think about the pure logistics of the temple system in Jerusalem.
Okay.
You have hundreds of thousands of pilgrims pouring into the city for major festivals, right? Like Passover.
Massive crowds.
Huge. And these pilgrims are arriving from all over the known world. So they bring foreign currency with them, Roman coins, Greek drachmas.
So those have Caesar's face on them.
Exactly. They bore images of pagan emperors and gods. So according to Jewish law, you couldn't use that impure money to pay the annual temple tax or buy sacrifices.
So you can't drop a coin with Jupiter on it into the offering plate?
Right. It had to be exchanged for specialized temple currency.
Let me guess, the exchange rate wasn't exactly favorable to the peasant farmer traveling from Galilee.
Oh, it was a steep, highly profitable markup.
Naturally.
And that was just step one. Once you actually had the right currency, you had to purchase unblemished sacrificial animals. Doves, sheep, cattle.
And you couldn't just bring any animal from your farm back home, could you?
No, it had to be inspected and approved by temple officials. And unsurprisingly, the most convenient way to ensure your animal was approved was to just buy it directly from the officially sanctioned temple vendors.
One's located conveniently right there in the courtyards.
Exactly. So you add in the tithes, the mandatory offerings, the currency exchange, and the sheer volume of daily sacrifices. And what you have is a massive financial monopoly.
Wow.
And the upper echelons of the Sanhedrin, particularly the families of the high priests, they controlled this entire apparatus.
So we aren't talking about a modest collection plate here. We are talking about a multi-million, or I guess in today's terms, a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Billions. Without a doubt. We are talking about the economic heartbeat of the entire region moving through one building.
That is insane to think about.
And this immense wealth, it served a dual, highly pragmatic purpose. Yes, it enriched the elite families tremendously, but far more importantly, it allowed the Sanhedrin to pay off the Romans.
Ah, there it is. The river of money.
Right. By keeping that river of money flowing steadily into Roman coffers through taxes and tribute, the Jewish leaders essentially bought their own local autonomy.
It's a deeply cynical, symbiotic relationship, isn't it?
Completely. Rome got its money and geopolitical stability without having to deploy legions to, police every street corner in Jerusalem.
And the Sanhedrin got to maintain their absolute power and their religious monopoly over the people.
Exactly. Win-win for the people at the top.
Okay, so God Inc. is a well-oiled, highly profitable machine. Everyone's making money, the Romans are happy, but then a massive disruption hits the market.
The ultimate market disruption.
Right. Enter a grassroots group known as the Sect of the Nazarenes, or the Way, led by figures like James, and of course, initially founded by Jesus of Nazareth. And this is where the historical lens we're using today really changes the narrative of everything you've ever heard in Sunday school.
Yeah, because traditionally, the conflict between the Sanhedrin and Jesus is framed purely as a theological dispute.
Right, we're taught they clashed over blasphemy or, different interpretations of the Sabbath or his messianic claims.
But when you look at the mechanisms of power in first century Judea, the theological dispute was merely the surface tension.
Just the excuse.
Right. Underneath, this was a catastrophic economic threat. The Nazarenes were teaching something incredibly dangerous to the business model of God Inc.
Which was what?
They were teaching that salvation was free.
Which, to us, sitting here today, talking on this deep dive, that sounds like a beautiful spiritual concept, right? Grace. Forgiveness without a price tag.
Sure, it sounds lovely today.
But to the Sanhedrin, that doesn't sound like spiritual enlightenment at all. That sounds like Chapter 11 bankruptcy.
Precisely. If you strip away the requirement for a physical, localized sacrifice, you strip away the need for the entire temple apparatus.
The whole thing crumbles.
The Nazarenes taught that you didn't need to pay a monetary toll to reach God. You didn't need the money changers. You didn't need to buy the approved lamb at a 300% markup.
You could find salvation directly, without any mediation from the temple elite.
Right. It's the ultimate market disruption.
Let's actually ground this in a modern equivalent for the listener, because I think it helps visualize the stakes. Imagine a massive corporate monopoly, let's say a giant telecommunications conglomerate that has a total stranglehold on the market.
Okay, I like this.
They charge you for every single text, every phone call, every byte of data. They own all the cell towers, and you basically have no choice but to pay their exorbitant fees just to communicate.
Right, you're trapped in their ecosystem.
Exactly. Then, suddenly, a group of rogue engineers invents an open-source, completely free, global Wi-Fi network.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And they don't even patent it. They just start giving it away to the public on the street corners.
Just bypassing the cell towers completely.
Exactly. The telecom executives sitting in their luxury boardrooms don't care about the philosophy of open source technology. They don't care about the ethics of it. They care that their stock price is about to hit absolute zero.
That analogy perfectly illustrates the panic within the Sanhedrin. The teachings of the Nazarenes were actually described in some of these texts as boulders in a river.
Boulders in the river of money.
Yes, deliberately placed to divert the flow of wealth away from the temple coffers. Because if the populace actually internalized the belief that they didn't need to pay for God's blessings,
The entire financial structure of God Inc. would collapse overnight.
it would. And remember that symbiotic relationship we talked about. If the money stopped flowing into the temple, the Sanhedrin couldn't pay off the Romans.
Oh. And if they miss their payments to Rome,
The Roman prefect steps in.
it's game over.
The local autonomy is revoked immediately. The legions march in, they strip the Sanhedrin of all remaining political and judicial authority, and they institute direct, brutal military control.
So from their perspective, Jesus of Nazareth isn't just some rogue street preacher annoying the local priests with new ideas.
Not at all. He is an existential economic and political threat to the survival of the entire ruling class.
He is a massive liability that simply has to be eliminated. Which brings us to the execution.
The crucifixion.
Right. But wait, I'm actually stuck on something here. If the Sanhedrin is this incredibly powerful autonomous body that controls the religious courts, why did they just quietly get rid of him themselves?
It's a great question.
Because under Jewish law, the punishment for blasphemy or heresy is stoning, right?
Yes, exactly.
So why does this escalate all the way to a Roman crucifixion? Why involve Pilate at all?
That is the brilliant, dark maneuvering of the Sanhedrin at work. Stoning was something they could absolutely manage internally. But you have to remember, Jesus had gained a massive following by this point.
He was a populist leader.
Exactly. A quiet internal execution, like a stoning in an alley, could easily turn him into a local martyr and spark a massive riot in the city.
And riots bring the Romans.
Exactly. Furthermore, the Sanhedrin needed to send a message so terrifying that the movement would just shatter permanently. They needed the ultimate deterrent.
And the ultimate deterrent in the first century was Roman crucifixion.
Yes.
But wait, Rome used crucifixion strictly as a political tool, right? It was a theater of terror.
Pure theater of terror.
It was this agonizing, highly public death reserved specifically for rebels, insurrectionists, enemies of the state. Rome didn't care about Jewish religious debates over theology.
Not in the slightest. If the high priest Caiaphas went to Pontius Pilate and said, "Hey, this peasant from Galilee is preaching an unorthodox interpretation of the Torah and claiming to be a spiritual savior," Pilate would have literally laughed him out of the fortress.
Right. Pilate couldn't care less.
Rome had a firm policy of tolerating local religions as long as they didn't incite tax revolts or armed rebellion.
So for the Sanhedrin to utilize the Roman military machine to execute their problem, they had to pull off a masterclass in political spin.
They had to rebrand a religious dispute into a federal crime.
Wow. They framed it entirely as a political challenge to the emperor.
They did. High-ranking members of the Sanhedrin had to sell a narrative of high treason to Pilate. They argue that Jesus wasn't just a spiritual teacher. They said he was claiming to be a literal king of the Jews.
And that is a title that only Rome could bestow.
Exactly. Claiming it yourself is treason. They heavily implied that this Nazarene movement would eventually withhold taxes from Caesar and spark a regional armed uprising.
So they essentially weaponized the absolute crushing power of the Roman state to protect their own bank accounts.
Yes. They handed Pilate a supposed insurrectionist to keep their own hands technically clean and to make the death as horrific as possible for anyone thinking of taking Jesus' place.
The treason charge was just a calculated lethal maneuver.
By securing a Roman execution, the Sanhedrin achieved multiple goals at once. They eliminated their biggest economic liability, they made his death a public spectacle designed to induce mass terror, and they even proved their loyalty to Rome by proactively dealing with a quote-unquote rebel.
It's ruthless. Okay, so they execute the leaguer. The head is severed. In a normal corporate hostile takeover, or, mafia turf war, you take out the boss and the family scatters. The threat is neutralized.
Right, the telecom monopoly crushes the open source hackers.
Exactly. But that's not what happens here. The Nazarenes didn't just fade away into the Galilean countryside.
No, but they didn't.
They stayed in Jerusalem. They grew. The boulders in the river were actually multiplying faster than before.
The deterrent completely failed.
So the Sanhedrin is realizing their political maneuvering didn't work. They need to escalate to direct, violent suppression. They need to bring in a cleaner.
They realize that local arrests and theological debates in the synagogues just aren't working anymore. The movement is spreading too fast. It's even infiltrating the lower ranks of the priesthood.
Oh, wow. So it's inside the house.
Yeah. They don't need politicians anymore. They need a militarized strategy. They need a fanatic who understands the law perfectly, but is willing to use brute force to protect it.
And sitting right there in their ranks, the protege of one of their most powerful members is a man named Saul of Tarsus.
Enter Saul.
Let's define who Saul actually is before we get into the bloodshed.
Sure.
Because I think the cultural image of him is often just like a guy in sandals walking down a dusty road. But the historical profile paints a picture of someone highly trained, elite, and incredibly dangerous.
He was a heavyweight.
The texts call him a Hellenistic Jew and a Pharisee. What does that actually mean in terms of his power and status?
Being a Hellenistic Jew is a crucial distinction here. It meant Saul wasn't a rural peasant from the backwoods. Tarsus was a major cosmopolitan city in the Roman province of Cilicia.
So he was a city guy.
Very much so. Tarsus was known for its universities and Stoic philosophy. Saul spoke fluent Greek. He deeply understood Greco-Roman culture, rhetoric, and law.
So he could navigate the wider Roman world.
Easily. But he was also sent to Jerusalem to be educated under Gamaliel, and Gamaliel was arguably the most respected and powerful rabbi of the Pharisaic party on the Sanhedrin.
And the Pharisees weren't just a religious club, right? They were a really powerful political faction.
They were the legal scholars, the constitutional lawyers of their day. They heavily influenced public opinion and local policy.
So to be trained by Gamaliel.
To be trained by him was to be groomed for the absolute highest levels of religious and political leadership. Saul was brilliant, he was highly connected, and completely, terrifyingly zealous for the traditions of the Jewish law.
He was a true believer in the system of God, Inc.
A radical true believer.
And because he's a true believer, the Sanhedrin gives him an extraordinary amount of power. He essentially goes from being a legal scholar to a high-level enforcer.
The muscle.
The texts describe him acting like a corporate fixer, or even like a rogue internal affairs agent whose only job is to silence whistleblowers by any means necessary. He is given the authority to hunt, track, and decimate the followers of the way.
He is leading organized violent suppression. He is securing official warrants from the high priest to conduct house-to-house raids.
Just ripping people out of their homes.
We really have to visualize the terror of this. He is kicking down doors in Jerusalem, dragging men and women out into the streets, throwing them into prisons, and acting as both prosecutor and executioner in local tribunals.
He is systematically trying to rip this open-source network out by its roots.
Exactly.
Which culminates in the most famous execution he oversaw before his transformation. The stoning of Stephen. Now, Stephen is historically recognized as the very first Christian martyr, and according to the historical texts, a young Saul, probably in his late 20s or early 30s at this time, was the driving force behind this. He engineered the trial, approved the execution, and literally stood guard over the cloaks of the men who threw the stones.
He was managing the crime scene?
It is a brutal, visceral enforcement of the Sanhedrin's monopoly.
It is. But if you dig into the timeline and the historical framing of Stephen's death, a massive, glaring anomaly emerges in the sources we're looking at.
Okay, what kind of anomaly?
The texts we are analyzing present a really fascinating theory. They argue that labeling Stephen as the first martyr is actually a deliberate historical cover-up.
Wait, really? A cover-up?
A massive PR deflection engineered decades later.
To hide what, exactly?
To hide Saul's whereabouts during the crucifixion of Jesus.
Oh.
Think about the timeline for a second. Jesus of Nazareth was executed in the very same city, under the very same geopolitical pressures, just months, maybe a year or two at most, prior to Stephen's death.
Okay, right. They happen almost back to back.
Right. Saul is the golden boy of Gamaliel. He is the chief enforcer for the Sanhedrin. His singular obsession is eradicating this specific sect.
That's his entire job description.
Yet when the founder and leader of this sect is arrested, put through a highly controversial midnight trial, handed over to the Romans, and publicly crucified,
Saul is nowhere to be found.
Saul's own later writings and the historical records make absolutely no mention of his involvement or presence at Jesus' trial and death.
That defies all logic. I mean, you have the Sanhedrin's top attack dog, a guy whose only goal is to destroy the Nazarenes. And we're supposed to believe that during the most critical operation against them in history, the trial of their actual leader, Saul, was just, what, on vacation?
Or sitting quietly in a library, completely unaware of the biggest trial in the city.
Yeah, that makes no sense.
The analytical argument here is that the omission is intentional and highly strategic.
PR spin.
Exactly. Look at it from a public relations perspective decades later. Paul is traveling the Roman Empire, trying to build a global religion based entirely on the teachings, death, and resurrection of Jesus.
Right.
He is writing letters to churches across the Mediterranean. If the early followers of Jesus, the very people he was trying to lead, knew that Paul had actively participated in handing Jesus over to the Romans to be tortured and killed,
his message would have been totally dead on arrival. You can't walk into a room of grieving followers and say, hey, everyone, follow me. I'm building a global church in honor of the guy I personally helped assassinate.
They would have run him out of town or stoned him themselves.
It is an impossible brand to sell.
So the theory suggests that heavily emphasizing his role in the death of Stephen, who was a prominent follower, sure, but not the founder, serves a dual psychological purpose.
It lets him confess, but not to the worst crime.
Exactly. It allows Paul to confess to a terrible, violent past, which highlights the miraculous nature of his transformation and his reliance on grace.
Look how bad I was, and look at me now.
Right. But crucially, it acts as a firewall. It successfully distances himself from the far more devastating, unforgivable crime of participating in the death of Jesus himself.
You confess to the lesser crime to permanently bury the capital offense. That is brilliant, dark PR.
It's a very modern political tactic, honestly.
Focus everyone's attention on Stephen so nobody asks where you were on Good Friday.
Precisely.
But let's bring the timeline back to the immediate aftermath of Stephen's death, because this is where the narrative shifts from Saul the hunter to Saul the hunted.
This is the turning point.
He is their top enforcer. He's executing their rivals. He is getting results. But wait, I'm stuck here. If Saul is getting exactly the violent results the Sanhedrin asked for, why do they suddenly decide he is a problem?
Because the Sanhedrin miscalculated the blowback?
The blowback from Stephen's death.
Yes. They assumed that a public, incredibly violent execution of a prominent figure like Stephen would shatter the morale of the Nazarenes. They expected the movement to scatter in fear.
But they didn't.
Instead, the persecution acted like an accelerant. The Nazarenes didn't dissolve, they doubled down. And Saul's response to that was to escalate his own aggressive, militant crusade.
So he just pushes harder.
His violent house-to-house raids, the screams in the streets, the constant arrests, it created a massive powder keg of public unrest in Jerusalem.
And as we established earlier, what is the one thing the Roman Empire absolutely will not tolerate?
Domestic chaos. Instability.
Because it threatens the money.
Exactly. Rome's entire administrative policy was based on maintaining order to ensure the smooth extraction of wealth. They had a zero-tolerance policy for civil unrest because riots disrupt commerce, and disrupted commerce means the river of money stops flowing.
It's like a regional manager at a massive franchise, right?
Yeah.
The corporate executives in Rome don't care how you arrange the shelves. They don't care what uniforms your employees wear, as long as the profits increase and there are zero customer complaints.
Right. Just keep the numbers going up.
But the second customers start rioting in the parking lot, burning down the store, and the cash registers stop ringing. Corporate isn't going to send a strongly worded email. They are going to fire the manager, send in armed security, and take over the store themselves.
That is exactly the threat the Sanhedrin faced. The Roman prefects didn't care about the theological purity of the Jewish temple, but they cared deeply about violent riots in the streets of Jerusalem.
Because it makes them look bad to the emperor.
And if the Sanhedrin couldn't control their own population, Rome would replace them. They would strip the council of its remaining authority, send in the legions, and institute direct martial law.
So the Sanhedrin is suddenly in full-blown panic mode. They look at Saul, and the lens completely flips.
He is no longer their prized asset.
Right. He is no longer their loyal enforcer. He is a rogue agent. He is a fanatic whose absolute zealotry is drawing catastrophic Roman attention to their doorstep.
He has transitioned from a useful tool into a massive economic and political liability.
So, to signal to Rome that they are stabilizing Judea and restoring order, the Sanhedrin realizes they have to eliminate the source of the fire.
They have to amputate the infected limb.
They need to eliminate Saul.
But they can't just send a couple of temple guards to stab him in a back alley.
Why not? They're the Sanhedrin.
Because they have a massive legal hurdle blocking them. Saul isn't just a local zealot they can quietly disappear. He holds a trump card that makes him almost untouchable locally.
Which is?
He is a Roman citizen.
Oh, right. That changes everything.
That is the pivotal detail that dictates everything that follows. Roman citizenship in the first century, especially for a Jew living in a province, was relatively rare, and it came with profound legal protections under laws like the Lex Julia Divi Publica.
So they couldn't just execute him like they did Jesus or Stephen.
No, a Roman citizen could not be arbitrarily bound, scourged, or executed by local authorities without a proper formal trial.
And a trial would be public.
Exactly. Furthermore, a citizen had the right of provocatio, which was the right to appeal any capital sentence directly to the emperor in Rome.
So if the Sanhedrin, acting merely as a local religious body, simply assassinates a Roman citizen in the streets of Jerusalem, the Roman backlash wouldn't just be severe, it would be terminal.
The legions would dismantle the Sanhedrin instantly. They would be signing their own death warrants.
Plus, consider the internal politics of it all. Saul is the protege of Gamaliel, right? He has powerful allies within the Pharisaic party.
Very powerful allies.
If the high priest, who is a Sadducee, moves against Saul openly, it could spark a civil war within the Sanhedrin itself.
It would tear the council apart.
So they need him dead. But they need total, absolute, plausible deniability.
They need someone else to pull the trigger.
They need a proxy.
Yeah.
And to understand how they orchestrated this trap, we actually have to zoom way out. We have to look at the broader geopolitical chessboard of the Middle East at that exact moment.
Right, because this is where the story stops being just about a religious dispute in Jerusalem.
Exactly. It becomes a massive regional conflict involving kings, armies, and a scandal that reads like ancient tabloid gossip.
It really does. To see the trap forming, we must introduce the major players surrounding Judea.
Set the stage for us.
Okay, so in the north, ruling over the region of Galilee, we have the tetrarch Herod Antipas.
Okay, Herod in the north.
And to the east and south, controlling the powerful and wealthy kingdom of Nabatea, we have King Aretas IV.
And from what I understand, these two rulers absolutely despise each other. Their relationship is defined by a bitter, violent blood feud.
A feud born out of a truly spectacular diplomatic insult.
Do tell.
Well, King Aretas I was a highly capable military leader. He maintained a tight, militarized grip on his kingdom, which included vital trade routes and, crucially, the major city of Damascus.
Okay, remember Damascus. That's going to be important later.
Yes. Now, initially, Aretas had formed a strategic alliance with Herod Antipas, and to seal this treaty, Aretas gave his daughter, Phasaelis, in marriage to Antipas.
A classic ancient world peace treaty.
Mm-hmm.
You marry my daughter, our borders remain secure, and we don't go to war.
Very standard. But Herod Antipas possessed a destructive level of political and personal ambition.
Oh boy.
During a trip to Rome, he stayed with his half-brother and began a scandalous affair with his half-brother's wife.
Who was also his niece, right?
Yes, a woman named Herodias. It was incredibly messy. So Antipas decided to divorce Aretas's daughter, utterly humiliating her and her father publicly in order to marry his sister-in-law.
I mean, you don't just dump a powerful, militarized king's daughter for your sister-in-law and expect a polite letter of disappointment.
Right.
Aretas must have been enraged.
He was incensed. Aretas retaliated by launching a full-scale border war against Herod Antipas.
Hmm.
And according to historical records, the Nabatean cavalry and forces utterly destroyed Antipas's army.
Just wiped them out.
It was a humiliating, devastating military defeat for the Herodian dynasty.
Okay, so Aretas hates Herod. The region is actively at war. But where does the Sanhedrin fit into this? Jerusalem is in Judea, it isn't in Nabatea, and isn't in Galilee. Why do they care about this border war?
Because the Sanhedrin, particularly the conservative Jewish elite led by the high priest Caiaphas, shared Aretas's fierce hatred for the Herodian family.
Oh, the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Exactly. The Sanhedrin viewed the Herodians as corrupt, illegitimate half-Jews who were constantly trying to push offensive Greco-Roman culture, architecture, and values onto the Jewish populace.
So to the Sanhedrin, Herod Antipas was a dangerous, compromising force diluting their religious authority.
Exactly. Even though there was no formal written treaty between the high priest in Jerusalem and King Aretas in Nabatea, they had an active geopolitical alignment. They both desperately wanted the Herodian dynasty wiped off the map.
And this shared animosity led to some incredibly dark, brilliant strategic maneuvering by the Sanhedrin.
Master chess players, really.
And to prove that the Sanhedrin was capable of this level of manipulation, the texts point us to a previous event, which is the execution of John the Baptist. If we look at how John died, we see the Sanhedrin's playbook in action.
Yes, walk us through that, because it establishes the exact precedent for what happens to Saul.
Right. So John the Baptist was a massive cultural phenomenon.
Huge.
He was a radical prophet, preaching in the wilderness, drawing huge crowds, and openly criticizing the religious establishment. He was baptizing people in the river, which was essentially offering a form of purification that completely bypassed the temple's ritual baths and sacrifices.
Right back to the economic threat.
Exactly. The Sanhedrin viewed John as a dangerous, unpredictable threat to their authority.
No.
But they don't send their guards to arrest him. They don't stone him.
No, they don't lift a finger against him directly.
Why not?
Because John was also openly, loudly condemning Herod Antipas for his unlawful, scandalous marriage to Herodias.
Ah. So John is attacking their political rival, too.
Exactly. So what did the Sanhedrin do? They sat on their hands. They intentionally withheld their immense political and legal influence.
They could have saved him, right?
They absolutely could have protected John, claiming religious jurisdiction over a prophet. Instead, they just let Herod Antipas arrest John, imprison him, and eventually execute him.
They let Herod do the dirty work.
Yes.
They eliminate a massive religious rival without spending a dime or taking any of the blame.
But take it a step further. What does that execution do to Herod's political standing?
It destroys it. John was deeply beloved by the masses. By executing a holy man, Antipas cemented himself as the ultimate villain to the public.
He looks like a monster.
It sparked massive outrage and profound civil unrest throughout Galilee. And remember our cardinal rule of the era? What does Rome hate more than anything?
Instability. A disrupted tax base.
Precisely. The Sanhedrin weaponized John's death. They knew that letting Herod kill a popular prophet would guarantee domestic chaos.
Combined with the crushing border war that Aretas was already waging, the entire region of Galilee became an uncontrollable powder keg.
And the strategy worked flawlessly, didn't it?
It did. The instability became so severe, and the reports back to Rome were so alarming that Emperor Tiberius eventually had enough. He stepped in, stripped Herod Antipas of his power, his wealth, and his territory, and exiled him to Gaul.
I just need to pause and let the sheer cynicism of that sink in.
It's heavy.
The Sanhedrin used the public beheading of a prophet to intentionally trigger a geopolitical crisis, knowing that the resulting chaos would force the Roman emperor to remove their political rival.
They are playing 3D chess with people's lives.
They really are. And once you realize that is their established playbook, that they will actively sacrifice a prominent figure to achieve a broader political goal while maintaining clean hands, you look at the fate of Saul of Tarsus in a completely new light.
You have to view Saul through that exact same strategic lens.
Okay, let's look at it.
The Sanhedrin needs to get rid of Saul. His violent zealotry is causing catastrophic Roman attention. But he's a Roman citizen. They can't kill him locally without facing the wrath of the emperor.
So they need a proxy.
Right.
They need a foreign entity to do the dirty work, just like they used Herod.
And who is the most aggressive, militarized ruler in the immediate region who absolutely despises political agitators crossing his borders.
King Aretas IV.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the lethal mechanism of the Damascus trap. How do they actually get Saul into Aretas' crosshairs?
The trap relies heavily on geography and the specific informal political agreements of the time.
Okay.
The high priest needs Saul far out of Jerusalem, but he needs him to travel somewhere highly dangerous. So Saul, still believing he is the favored enforcer, requests letters of authority from the high priest to travel to Damascus.
To arrest Jewish Christians who had fled there after Stephen's death, right?
Yes.
And Damascus, crucially, is under the direct militarized control of King Aretas.
Exactly. Now, under normal circumstances, the high priest in Jerusalem has absolutely no legal jurisdiction to send an armed posse of men into a foreign city to conduct arrests.
Right. Extraditing people across sovereign borders without permission is basically an act of war.
It is. However, because of the geopolitical alignment between Aretas and the Sanhedrin, their shared hatred of Herod, they operated under what historians call a hands-off agreement.
Like a loophole.
Yes, Aretas allowed the local Jewish synagogues in Damascus to police themselves internally according to Jerusalem's religious laws, provided they didn't cause public riots.
So on paper, Saul asking for these letters makes total sense to him. He's going to use this diplomatic loophole to go to Damascus, round up the heretics, and bring them back in chains.
Right.
Saul thinks he's getting a massive promotion. He thinks he's expanding God Inc.'s jurisdiction into new territory.
Saul genuinely believes he is acting as the faithful weapon of the Sanhedrin. But the texts we are exploring propose that the Sanhedrin knew exactly what they were orchestrating.
They weren't just utilizing a loophole, they were setting a snare.
The high priest wasn't going to let this play out to chance. The analytical theory argues that the high priest sent secret intelligence, a deliberate tip-off, directly to the Nabatean governor in Damascus.
The military commander who answered directly to King Aretas.
Yes.
Wait, let me make sure I'm following this. They're sending their own top operative behind enemy lines into a militarized zone and simultaneously feeding his arrival coordinates to the foreign military.
This is the John the Baptist playbook refined. The intelligence the Sanhedrin secretly sent didn't frame Saul as a brilliant religious scholar coming to debate theology in the local synagogue.
Of course not.
It framed him as an armed, Roman-affiliated Jewish zealot, a militant extremist, crossing the Nabatean border with a posse of men to conduct unauthorized arrests and stir up rebellion.
Wow. To a foreign military governor who is already fighting border wars and dealing with regional espionage, that doesn't look like a religious dispute at all.
Not at all.
That looks like a covert military operation. That looks like an act of aggression by a Roman citizen.
It looks exactly like espionage and subversion. The Sanhedrin fully anticipated that the Nabatean guards would treat Saul as a foreign spy or a highly dangerous political agitator.
They expected him to be killed.
They expected the governor, acting under Aretas' strict martial law, to execute Saul on sight the moment he approached the city gates.
And here is the absolute legal brilliance of the trap. If Aretas' forces kill a Roman citizen, the Roman legal backlash falls squarely on King Aretas, not the Sanhedrin.
The high priest can just throw his hands up in shock, claim total ignorance, tell the Roman prefect that Saul went rogue and provoked the Nabateans, and they successfully eliminate their biggest liability without a single drop of blood on their hands.
It is breathtakingly evil.
It really highlights the absolute moral bankruptcy of an institution completely consumed by self-preservation.
The money, the power, the desperate necessity of appeasing Rome, it completely dictated the morality of God Inc.
They would sacrifice anyone, even their most devoted son, to defend that river of money.
And the irony of it is staggering when you think about it. Saul's entire identity, his entire sense of self-worth, is built on his absolute blind loyalty to the law and the Sanhedrin.
Right.
He is burning his own soul to protect their power. And they take that loyalty, that blind zealotry, and they weaponize it against him. To them, he isn't a holy warrior. He's just a disposable pawn on a geopolitical chessboard.
Exactly. So we have to visualize the physical reality of this moment. Saul is on the road to Damascus. It is a grueling, multi-day journey through harsh terrain.
He's exhausted, probably.
He has his letters of authority tucked in his cloak. He is surrounded by his men. He is rehearsing his legal arguments and planning his raids.
He is completely unaware that he is walking directly into a military assassination plot.
He is a dead man walking.
And we know from historical records that the threat was real, right? This isn't just modern speculation.
Oh, it is deeply grounded in the history of the region. The biblical text in Acts 9, which is corroborated by Paul's later letters, confirms that the situation in Damascus was highly volatile.
Right.
It explicitly states that the ethnarch, the governor under King Aretas, was actively guarding the city gates with a garrison, with the specific intent to capture or kill Saul.
So the trap was real, it was active, and the military was waiting for him.
Yes.
But the plot doesn't go as the Sanhedrin planned, because before Saul reaches those heavily guarded gates, something intercepts him.
And this brings us to one of the most radical, fascinating reinterpretations in these analytical texts.
There we go.
Traditionally, the story of the road to Damascus features a sudden, blinding supernatural light and the voice of Jesus speaking from the heavens, knocking Saul to the ground.
The famous conversion moment.
However, the theory we are discussing approaches this monumental event from a strict counterintelligence perspective.
Right. If we're looking at this through the lens of a spy thriller, you don't get saved by a lightning bolt from a clear blue sky. You get saved by the underground resistance.
According to this theory, as Saul nears Damascus, he is intercepted not by a vision, but by physical operatives of the way.
The early Christian network.
Yes. We have to remember that these Christians were not just passive victims waiting around to be arrested or stoned. They possessed a highly sophisticated, deeply embedded underground intelligence network.
Which makes sense. You do not survive against the combined weight of the Sanhedrin's hit squads and Roman scrutiny without excellent communication lines, safe houses, and informants.
They had eyes and ears everywhere. Merchants, traders, sympathetic priests in the temple, synagogue gossip, they knew what was happening in Jerusalem.
So these Christian operatives intercept the intelligence, they get wind of the Sanhedrin's plot, they realize the high priest has sold Saul out to the Nabateans, so they intercept Saul on the road before he walks into the kill zone at the city gates. And what do? They don't ambush him with swords, they present him with intelligence.
They show him the reality of the board.
They present Saul with undeniable proof that his own mentors, the high priest he served, the elite council he revered, had tipped off the Damascus governor to execute him.
They reveal the trap.
Let me build an analogy here to capture the sheer psychological weight of this for Saul.
Please do.
Imagine a highly decorated, fiercely loyal intelligence agent. Let's say a black ops assassin for the CIA. He has spent his entire career doing the government's darkest, dirtiest work because he truly believes it is for the greater good of the nation.
He's a patriot.
Exactly. He is deployed on a mission to eliminate a high-value target behind enemy lines. But while he is en route, he is suddenly handed a burn notice. He's been disavowed.
Cut off.
But the burn notice isn't handed to him by his handler. It's handed to him by the enemy target he was sent to kill. And the target says, look at this intercepted comms data. Your own agency just gave your coordinates to the enemy military. They sent you here to die. We are the only ones telling you the truth.
Take a moment to consider the absolute psychological devastation of that realization.
It would break a person.
Try to imagine the internal, catastrophic collapse Saul would experience in the dust of that road. His entire worldview, his absolute belief in the moral righteousness of the temple elite, the justification for all the violence he had committed, the blood of Stephen on his hands.
It is all instantly, violently shattered. The foundation of his reality crumbles.
The sources, the texts, they always refer to the blindness Saul experiences here. In the traditional narrative, he is literally physically blind for 3 days. He has to be led by the hand into the city.
But how does this analytical theory interpret that blindness?
They argue the blindness is intensely metaphorical. It represents the total, paralyzing shock of ultimate betrayal.
A psychological break.
Yes. When you suddenly realize that the entire structure of your life, your morality, and your mission is a cynical lie, you are plunged into psychological darkness. You lose your ability to see the world as you knew it.
Because the law that he had dedicated his life to enforcing, the institution he thought was divine, was the very thing that had just sentenced him to death in a cheap political maneuver.
Exactly. He is catatonic with the realization of his own foolishness and guilt.
That is a staggering realization. He is emotionally and mentally frozen in the desert. But recognizing the trap is only step one. Step two is surviving it.
Right.
Because regardless of his internal crisis, he is still physically standing outside a militarized city where the governor's guards are actively sweeping the perimeter looking for him.
The physical danger has not passed at all. The name Saul of Tarsus is now completely radioactive.
It is on the Nabatean arrest warrants.
It is known to the local synagogues, who might have been compromised by the high priest tip-off. If anyone in Damascus identifies him as Saul the Pharisee, the enforcer from Jerusalem, he will be executed on sight as a foreign spy.
He is a burned agent. He has to pull a vanishing act. He has to erase his past identity instantly if he wants to see tomorrow.
This is where the famous transition from the name Saul to Paul takes on a deeply tactical, survival-based meaning.
Really? I always thought that was just a spiritual name change.
According to this geopolitical theory, adopting the name Paul, which was his Roman cognomen, wasn't initially a grand religious milestone to signify a new spiritual birth. It was a tactical shield.
It was deep cover camouflage.
He needs a new passport, essentially, a new identity to slip past the checkpoints.
So he has to blind or completely kill off his old self to survive?
Yes. By dropping the prominent, zealous Jewish identity of Saul and adopting the common, culturally neutral Roman identifier Paul, he was attempting to disappear into the masses.
Just blend in.
But even with a new name, he couldn't survive in Damascus alone. He needed to blend into a network that had the resources and the secrecy to hide him from military sweeps.
And who is the only network operating completely under the radar in Damascus?
The pacifist, highly organized underground network of the Way.
The very people he came to drag back in chains.
He has to completely swap alliances. He seeks refuge with the Christians. And this is the turning point of history. The Christians agree to hide him.
They actually take him in.
They take him in. This culminates in the famous escape detailed in the texts, where Paul is eventually lowered down the exterior city wall in a woven basket under the cover of darkness.
Completely bypassing the governor's guards who have the gates locked down.
Exactly.
The basket escape. I mean, I've heard that story 100 times in Sunday school, but in this context, it feels like a tense scene straight out of a Cold War espionage movie.
It really does.
The military is sweeping the city, the gates are barricaded, and the underground resistance has to use their smuggling routes to get a burned, high-value asset exfiltrated over the wall in the dead of night. It's incredible.
It is a remarkable historical set piece. But if we dig into the motivations, it raises a profound, challenging question.
Why save him?
Yes. Why would the Christians save him? Why would the operatives of the Way risk their own lives, risk exposing their safe houses, and utilize their precious smuggling network to rescue the most dangerous, lethal hunter the Sanhedrin had ever sent against them?
It makes no logical sense.
Why not just let the Nabateans capture him, let the military execute him, and be done with their greatest persecutor once and for all?
From a purely pragmatic survival standpoint, letting Saul walk into the trap solves a lot of problems for the Way. It eliminates their boogeyman.
It absolutely does. But by choosing to save him, they achieved two incredible things that altered the course of human history.
Okay, what's the first?
First, from a strategic geopolitical perspective, they completely derailed the Sanhedrin's political plot. The high priest thought he had neatly solved his Roman liability problem by sacrificing Saul.
But he didn't.
By keeping Saul alive, the Christians stuck Jerusalem with a massive ongoing problem. But far more importantly, they flipped an enemy into their greatest strategic asset.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
They took the man who intimately, exhaustively knew the inner workings, the legal arguments, the financial structure, and the political weaknesses of God Inc., and brought him onto their side.
It's the ultimate intelligence coup. You capture the enemy's top general, but you don't torture him. You recruit him.
Right. But you mentioned a second reason they saved him, beyond just the strategic value.
What's the second reason?
The second reason is the very theological core of their movement. The texts highlight the concept of radical grace, demonstrated by the Way in this moment.
The grace that they preached.
Exactly. Their foundational teaching, the very teaching that made them an economic threat to the temple in the first place, was that God's love and salvation were free, unmerited, unearned gifts.
You couldn't buy them, and you couldn't earn them through strict obedience to the law.
Right. And they didn't just preach this as a nice philosophy. They lived it in the most extreme, dangerous circumstance imaginable.
They really put it into practice.
They looked at the man who had overseen the stoning of their friends, a man who came with warrants to destroy their families, and instead of taking justifiable vengeance, they offered him sanctuary. They offered him his life, completely free of charge.
So how does this exact moment, this physical rescue, rewrite the rest of history? Because Paul doesn't just quietly retire to a farm after escaping in the basket.
No, he doesn't. If we connect this physical event to the broader historical picture, the escape in the basket is the spark that ignites a global theological revolution.
The shift from legalism to grace.
Yes. The bitter betrayal by the Sanhedrin contrasted with the radical rescue by the Christians, fundamentally and permanently transformed Paul's theology.
Because he views the Sanhedrin's betrayal as the ultimate, undeniable failure of religious legalism.
Yes. For his entire life, Saul believed that strict adherence to the law of the temple was the only path to righteousness. He believed the institution was holy.
But then,
But when the very administrators of that law, the high priest, cynically weaponized it to assassinate him for political convenience, the illusion was shattered forever.
he saw the rod.
He realized that a system based on legalism, monetary tolls, and political power could never truly be holy. It was corrupt to the bone. It produced death.
And conversely, the people who were supposedly heretics, the people operating completely outside the boundaries of the law, were the ones who showed him true righteousness, true mercy.
This is the crux of it. Paul's lifelong, historically massive teaching of grace over law, which is the foundation of much of modern Christian theology, was not just an abstract philosophy he pondered in a quiet study somewhere.
It wasn't just a theological debate.
No, it was forged in brutal physical reality. The law, represented by the Sanhedrin and the temple system, sentenced him to death. Grace, represented by the unmerited favor of the underground Christians, gave him his life.
And he built his entire subsequent global ministry on the visceral reality of that contrast.
The analysts call this the Paul effect. And it is wild to think about the long-term economic and geopolitical ramifications of his transformation.
Because he doesn't just preach grace to a few Jewish communities in Judea.
No, he takes this message global. He takes it to the Gentiles, to the sprawling cities of the broader Roman Empire.
And by doing so, he weaponizes his intimate knowledge of the Sanhedrin's internal machine against them.
Oh, completely. He understood exactly how the river of money worked. He knew that the temple's wealth relied entirely on the exclusivity of salvation, the deeply ingrained idea that you had to go through them, pay their specific tolls, and buy their specific sacrifices to be right with the divine.
By taking the message of free salvation to the global stage, he is basically distributing the open source software to the entire Roman world.
Yes, exactly.
He is telling millions of people in Corinth, in Ephesus, in Rome itself, you don't need the temple in Jerusalem. You don't need to send your hard-earned money across the sea. You don't need to buy their sacrifices. You can have a direct, free relationship with the divine right here, right now.
The economic disruption over the next few decades is staggering. As Paul's version of Christianity spreads throughout the Mediterranean, establishing communities that bypass the temple entirely, the river of money that sustained the Sanhedrin begins to permanently dry up.
Their monopoly on salvation is broken.
And without that massive influx of wealth, their ability to appease Rome, pay their tributes, and maintain their political power severely diminishes.
It is the most profound poetic irony in ancient history. The Sanhedrin constructed this elaborate, lethal geopolitical trap to protect their wealth and stabilize their relationship with Rome.
Right.
They tried to sacrifice their top enforcer to save their corporate empire. But in doing so, they created the very man who would ultimately dismantle their entire monopoly. They created the architect of their own historical irrelevance.
It is a classic, devastating case of an institution prioritizing its own self-preservation over its founding ideals and suffering the ultimate blowback as a result.
By attempting to crush the disruption with lethal force, cynical politics, and foreign military traps, they inadvertently launched the disruption onto the global stage.
They absolutely did.
Okay, we have covered a massive amount of historical and analytical ground today on this deep dive. Let's do a quick recap of the journey we just took.
Good idea.
We started by looking at first-century Judea, not as a quiet religious backdrop, but as a complex, profit-driven monopoly, God Inc., desperately trying to protect its wealth from a grassroots movement offering free salvation.
And we saw how this establishment manipulated the Roman Empire, weaponizing crucifixion as a theater of terror to eliminate Jesus.
We then followed Saul, the highly educated elite enforcer, whose violent, zealous raids transitioned him from a prized asset into a catastrophic political liability for a Sanhedrin terrified of Roman martial law.
Which led us to the geopolitical chessboard. The bitter, humiliating blood feud between Herod Antipas and King Aretas IV.
We saw the Sanhedrin acting as master manipulators, letting John the Baptist die simply to trigger Roman intervention against their rival Herod.
And then we saw them use that exact same playbook to set the lethal Damascus trap for Saul, feeding false intelligence to a foreign military, hoping a Nabatean governor would execute their problem for them.
Finally, we explored the counterintelligence rescue, by the way. the metaphorical blindness that came from the paralyzing shock of complete institutional betrayal. Saul's tactical identity erasure into Paul, his harrowing escape in a smuggling basket, and how that radical inert act of grace forged his global theology, ultimately bankrupting the very legalistic system that tried to kill him.
It's an incredibly compelling narrative.
It really is. And to you, listening, it forces us to examine the structures of our own world. We might not be dealing with the Roman Empire, client kings, or ancient border wars today, but consider how often modern institutions, whether they are massive corporations, political parties, or even sprawling administrative states, prioritize their own self-preservation above all else.
It happens constantly.
How often do they protect their own rivers of money and influence over the very ideals they claim to champion?
It is a recurring, deeply human theme throughout history. Institutions naturally evolve to protect themselves, often at the expense of their original purpose.
It truly is. And it's a testament to the fact that asking hard questions, challenging the accepted clean narratives, peering behind the metaphorical stained glass, doesn't have to destroy the value of history. It actually deepens our understanding of human nature.
It really does.
It shows us that history is incredibly messy, people are driven by complex motivations, and the truth is usually found in the murky gray areas where politics and belief collide.
And if we are thinking about the long, unpredictable arc of history, I want to leave everyone with one final, mind-bending historical reality to mull over.
Oh, please do.
We spent this entire deep dive discussing how the Sanhedrin manipulated the immense, crushing power of the pagan Roman Empire to execute Jesus and protect their system. We discussed how Saul's transformation was triggered by the Sanhedrin attempting to use that exact same geopolitical environment, the threat of Roman intervention, to have him assassinated.
Right. The Roman Empire was the ultimate terrifying enforcer of the status quo.
The invincible superpower that crushed absolutely anything in its path.
Yes.
So consider the incredible irony of this historical outcome. Roughly 3 centuries after Paul is lowered over that wall in a basket, fleeing into the night as a hunted, burned agent, that exact same Roman Empire would completely abandon its pantheon of pagan gods.
Wow.
It would officially adopt Paul's specific version of Christianity, the theology of radical grace, forged in the trauma of that betrayal, as its absolute defining state religion.
That is wild.
The empire that executed the founder, and the empire whose laws were weaponized to hunt Paul, eventually bowed its knee entirely to his movement.
History really does play the longest, most unpredictable game imaginable.
It truly does.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. I hope it challenged you to keep questioning the narrative, to keep looking past the surface level of the stories we are told. Because sometimes, when you take a hammer to that stained glass window and look at the murky, political, cutthroat waters underneath, the story you find is infinitely more fascinating than the one you thought you knew. See you next time.